Well, dear all, thank you for joining us from different corners of the world. I know Sylvia is here, so at least we got Peru covered. A lot of people from different corners of the world. All right, guys. Shravan is here, very popular on social media, but beyond that, in the larger professional realm too. Shravan is a BTech from IIT Roorkee. It's one of the premier, engineering colleges in India, and Shravan works as a product manager with one of India's very well-known startups, unicorns, Byju's. And in today's session, we're going to be understanding what exactly is a product manager.
Correct.
What is he or she supposed to do? Why does Shravan make fun of them so much? And then we're going to understand his philosophy around product management. And then, maybe hear some stories from him, right? I'm going to invite you, Shravan, to tell something about yourself to us, right?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much, Kai. Prakash, it's an honor speaking in front of such a great audience. And once again, I really like to speak as product managers. We are very well conversant with communication. That is one of the core skill sets that we look for. So just giving us a little background to my story, I think product management happened through serendipity. I was in college, and long back, I'm talking 2011, right? Around a decade back, right? So me with few of my friends, we built a very interesting app, which was more like a problem for us. We used to come from my college and go to Delhi, and we used to hang out with friends, drink a little, and a lot of times cops used to catch us, right? And they used to kind of put a ticket on us and ask $50 as a challan, or something like that. And we realized that this is really not working, because my parents used to send me like $100 a month to live, right? So what we did, we built this interesting app, which was like a Waze for cops, in which you can actually pinpoint a location, and you can actually say that the cop is standing in this particular lane and you don't have to go through this particular lane. What happened is that once we pushed that to the Play Store, something broke apart. And in 3 months, we had organically 400,000 downloads. And that was happening across the globe, right? People from Atlanta, Georgia are kind of downloading that. Chicago, people are downloading the app. In Indonesia, multiple places, right? And I'm talking of the times when Google didn't even have Play Store analytics, right? So I actually sent an email to Google asking, who are these people who are actually downloading my app and what are they using it for, right? And Google sends me out this demographic data. And after that, I was just mind blown that I realized that the problem that I was facing, maybe a similar use case, was actually faced by other people across the globe. And then what happened, we went to the Delhi government and told them that why don't you use this app as a cop density measurement? That if there is a certain place and there are a lot of people and there is some sort of havoc happening, somebody can actually point it out that we need more cops there. What happened 2 months later than that was this large enterprise firm reached out to me from the US and they said, we want to buy your app. Earlier, I thought it's more like a Nigerian scam or something that's happening with me, that somebody's reaching out to me and saying that we want to buy your app. And we sold that app for around $60,000, which was huge back then. And then I realized that, what am I doing in engineering? This is something that I really like to do, solving problems and getting paid for it. What's better than that, right? And in my 4th year in college, which was my final year in college, somebody gave me this interesting book by this speaker called Marty Kagan. He writes a lot about product management, and the book's name is Inspired, right? And I realized that this is something similar to what I do. It is exactly similar. I'm making features for people, they're using it, they're deriving value out of it. So why don't I try this? And against all odds of not going to an IIM, I actually joined Flipkart. Working in Flipkart was like a phenomenal experience, because back then in 2015, Flipkart had already become at a user base around 400 million, 300 million, right? And I could see features getting built at scale, how personalization is really helping people find the right products and stuff like that. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And I spent a lot of time with the product team understanding how do they do consumer research, how do they do user research, and eventually made a transition, right? The first transition that I made was in this unicorn company, which is currently a unicorn. It was not a unicorn back then, called Blackbuck. I'm not sure if people would have heard of it. I would maybe put in an analogous manner. It is like an Uber for trucks. It was an Uber for trucks. Like you can book a truck and actually carry your load from one place to another. So I built the pricing app. spent some time over there. After a year, I realized that I've been working in data for long. And then I moved to Times Group, which is one of the largest media houses in the country. I spent some time over there as a rotational product manager, working on Ghana.com. Ghana.com is a very famous website, guys, in India. It is more like the Spotify of India. Spent some time over there. Then spent some time in magicbricks.com, which is like the Zillow of India. Zillow of India, spent some time over there. And the last 3 years have been primarily in education. Currently, I take care of the largest live learning platform in the country and across the globe. I work there as a principal product manager, taking care of K-12. The segment specifically is the education segment of from 10-year-olds to around 18-year-olds. And I build interesting products. And besides that, you have already spoken about the LinkedIn journey. I guess that's fair and square. So that's like a small journey that I've had. But the last 1 year has been phenomenal, speaking to people like you, helping out startups, mentoring people, starting my own cohort, and doing a bunch of stuff around that. Yeah.
So, thank you so much for that really fast, compressed introduction.
Yeah.
For people who are from India, you understand the IIT and IIM references.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of people are from Peru, Italy, Spain, Romania, UK, Middle East, USA, right? So just to set a bit of a context, the IITs, I think of them as almost the equivalent of an MIT or a Stanford when it comes to technical education in India. IIMs are the equivalent of your Yale or one of those Kellogg's. So the IIT IIM is a very coveted qualification, highly competitive, insanely competitive institutions to get into in India. And that was why Shravan made it a point to say, I chose not to go to an IIM for my MBA after my IIT, but I joined the upcoming startup called Flipkart.
Yep.
So, Shravan, I think the first question then is, what exactly is a product manager? Like, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Manager seems to be, you throw the word manager at someone and it conjures up a certain image. You are managing something.
Yep.
And then you throw the word product at us,
yep.
It conjures up another image. Anything could be a product.
Yep.
It could be virtual, it could be physical, it could be a service.
Yep.
And then you put the two of them together.
Yep.
And then it conjures certain things, but then again, it's difficult to hold on. Like, what exactly is this product manager? Can you help us understand what's a product manager and why he or she is needed in the larger ecosystem?
Correct. A very interesting question, Prakash. So I think fundamentally, if you look at product managers, I would not use the word product manager. Let's not use it right now. I'll come to the context of it. Any user problem that we see typically leads to a solution towards it. Like if you want to move from one place to another, you have to do a plane ticket or a train ticket, something like that. Or if you have to purchase some consumer goods, you go to a shop, you go to a 7-Eleven and actually buy something out of it. Now, what happens? There are two aspects to it. A product manager fundamentally is a problem solver. He's solving problems for you. Now, then you should ask this question that why are these two different words? Why can't I just call him a problem solver and why a product manager? You don't go to a shop and say the shopkeeper, dude, you're a product manager. It's not like that, right? The only thing is that any simplistic first principle problem fundamentally is easy to solve at a smaller scale. Like if you want to sell things to somebody, you can open a shop and probably help consumers, 100 consumers in a day, maybe 500 consumers in a day, or maybe 1,000 consumers in a day. Assume the same problem you have to do for millions of people at the same time. Like another example that I would put in front of you, before Uber happened, right? If you had to actually book a cab, you actually called a cab service, haggled around the price, figured out the availability, and it was a pain of an experience that you wanted to have. What did Uber do, right? It effectively put that vertically very high and took it like to 100 million users, right? And streamlined the process. So they solved the problem at scale. So the first thing that I would want to say that what a product manager does, he's a problem solver, but at scale. That's the first part, right? Now, what is the difference between a problem solving at scale and a general problem solving, right? Problem solving in a typical sense, if you want to buy something, it's a combination of variables, supply and demand. right? You want to buy a shirt, you go to a shop, you buy a shirt, right? But that is specific to maybe 500 consumers or 100 consumers. It's a simple problem, right? But if you really have to sell shirts at 100 million users or 200 million users, you have to figure out what is his purchasing capacity. Is the demand enough, right? What is the demographic of the user? What kind of shirts does he like? Is it personalized enough? Now, all of these variables, once they come into an equation, it becomes a non-deterministic equation. It's not a deterministic equation like just going to a shop and buying something for you, right? Once it becomes a non-deterministic equations, we as product managers look at things which don't change with time, which are like the first principles. Like what I mean by first principle, it's a statement which will stay true even 100 years in the future. Let me give a very, very simple example of that. The example of that is, assume that you have to go from Berlin to, assume you have to go to Bonn from Berlin, right? And I give you two options. One option is going by a Mercedes, second option going by a bus. More often than not, you'll choose the Mercedes as the first option, right? Because it gives you comfort or happiness. What do you want to call it? Whatever you want to call it, comfort, happiness, value, whatever. So the first principle here is that value brings happiness. That if you're using a Mercedes, that is something that will stay true all your life. Whatever product gives you a better value than the existing solution in the market, you will switch to that. The second value proposition here is happiness brings repeat usage. If I ask you 10 times that would you choose a Mercedes or a bus, more often than not, you will still choose the Mercedes only. So that's the second first principle. Happiness brings repeat usage. Now we as product managers tied them together. Value brings repeat usage. So that's why whenever we try to build consumer-focused products or products at scale, we look at deep consumer insights, like what makes the user tick. So the second thing that I would want to tell you is that a product manager is basically the spokesperson of the user. The first thing is he's a problem solver at scale. The second thing, he's the spokesperson of the user. Now, if these two things, they tied together, that individual effectively is a product manager. Now, there is another thing to it. Generally, when we talk to product managers, these managers, we talk about digital products. The reason for that is because scale is prevalent because of the internet. Before internet, it was not possible for me to understand somebody in Austria, what does he want? I had no clue, right? I cannot scale that way unless I had an operation there and started a shop there or a mall there or something like that, right? But with the advent of the internet, it became so accessible to everyone that I, sitting in India, now know in America what kind of product he would use for customer success support, right? So that's the reason we typically refer to digital problem solvers. And we are digital problem solvers, and that is what a product manager is. Right? You are a digital problem solver at scale, and simultaneously, you also take care of the core value that you're giving to the user and keeping it intact while you scale. That these are the two things that are very, very interesting. Now, in the aspect of where you called it as a manager, yes, because you're managing the life cycle, the journey of the entire user, because your end outcome is value from the ideation to the end value. You're ideating the entire process. You're taking care of the entire process. That's why you are a manager. And why it's a product, coming to your first question, because any product specifically means something tangible which gives you value, like water. It is something that you drink from a bottle, and it gives you value, that it helps you, quenches your thirst, or something like that. So a person who is giving value at scale and managing the entire life cycle is a product manager, if I want to put it in simpler words. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shravan. One question here.
Yeah.
So you had a certain journey. You said you were at IIT Roorkee. You put up a small company together with your friends and all. You played, you sold it off.
Yeah.
And you took a certain journey.
Yeah.
How does one become a product manager? Number one.
Got it.
Can anyone become a product manager?
Okay. Got it.
Number two.
Got it.
And number three, what is a typical, forget a day, what's a typical month or a quarter like for a product manager, so that we can at least, we heard you talked about first principles, we're hearing about building product at scale.
Correct.
But I think it's these three things, right?
Correct.
How does one become a product manager? Can anyone become a product manager? What's a typical quarter like? in the life of product manager?
Got
Shravan?
it. Got it. So three very interesting questions. The first question, that what it takes to be a PM, right? So I think the first thing that a PM looks at is a problem. Does the problem exist or not? Now the question comes, how do you identify that there is a problem? So that comes from a very fundamental thought process. So I'm an avid reader of comparative religion. So I actually go back and look at it. So there is this one very fundamental thought which is spoken in the Bhagavad Gita, which you call the song of the gods, if you put it outside India for the people, that it's the Hindu mythology book that you effectively read. So there's this one interesting thing, that what is the root of dharma or virtuousness? Dharma is virtuousness, right? The root of dharma is compassion. Now, once you have compassion for someone, let me give you a simple example. You see, COVID happened. A lot of people effectively faced problems. Now, you as an individual, if you in your capacity see any of your friends facing a problem, the first thing that you think of is, how do I eliminate this problem? How do I take away this pain from this particular guy? Or how do I give him value so that this problem never occurs? Either ways, right? Now, compassion actually leads you to discover problems. That's why you are observant enough. Like if you see a pet dying in your society and you're a pet lover, you will figure out, okay, what's the solution to solve it, right? Now that compassion, if that problem is large enough and you're deeply connected to it, that transforms into passion. That I want to solve this problem in some way. So compassion leads to passion. Now, once the passion is there, now I know that I am a pet lover and I want to solve the problem of that pets getting brutalized or some other problem. What solution do I bring forward towards it? That's when you start thinking of a solution. Now, since you are truly compassionate about it, you would also think of the scale of the problem. You will not only think like, okay, in my society, I'll take care of pets. I'll in general take care of the problem, right? So that is where you will start thinking of scale. So problem solving, this passion would lead to experimentation and solutions, right? So the first thing that you would need to become a very great product manager is the art of compassion or attitude of gratitude. If you have that attitude of gratitude, you would automatically be very passionate about building things which help people transform. Because success is never personal, it's always collective. Growth is always collective. If people effectively, you help people to grow further in life without any fundamental objective or any transactional intent, it works as a network effect and everybody starts growing. So the first thing that I see in a PM is he accessible? Is he humble enough? Is he compassionate enough? That's the first thing. The second thing that is very, very important for you to become a PM is passion. And now, how do you define passion? That's again a why question that comes across. So in order to tell that, for me, think of it like this. Like Alessandro is in the call and he really likes cooking. Let's assume that he really likes cooking. Now, he doesn't cook just because somebody tells him, Alessandro, you made an amazing dish. He actually cooks for the fun of it, right? So when you enjoy the process more than the outcome, right? That is your passion. Because if you are dependent on the outcome, then any feedback comes as a positive or a negative feedback. If you take it negatively, you will stop doing it, right? But if you like mathematics fundamentally, you'll just keep on doing it. Any feedback is just like any other feedback, right? So when you enjoy the process more than the outcome, that is the second thing that I see in a PM, that is he truly passionate about it. And the third part that I typically see in a PM is the art of prioritization. Now, why is that important? Is someone speaking? Yeah. So the third part is the art of prioritization. The reason for that is, think of it like this. Right now, in the Zoom call, I only know you. Practically, I only know you, right? And if my words, they don't make concurrent sense and they take a lot of time to deliver, right? People lose interest. Why would they listen to me, right? And now think of it on a digital platform where I am not even there, right? So if you cannot prioritize information in a small set of people, small set of cohort, how will you prioritize it for millions of people? So the best way to do that is something that I think of is something called constrained thinking. And I put it like this. Like if I tell today, Prakash, tell me your last 5 years journey. You can write 5,000 words for it. But let me just ripple the question around and say, tell me your journey of your last 5 years, but in 50 words. but the constraint is that it has to be in 50 words. You will automatically shelf off the not so important details and keep the moat in the journey. So that is something that I also look at. So whenever I take a PM interview, I ask people, why don't you write me a solution to a problem? But the constraint is that you have to write it in 100 words. So these three things, if you are duly compassionate and accessible, and you observe a lot of things around you, that's one. Second, if you're truly passionate about solving the problem such that you don't really care about the outcome and you're perseverant about it. And the third part is, are you really prioritized enough? Because time is the actual currency here. Somebody would not come on the Uber app and spend 30, if it takes you 30 minutes to book a ride, you would never use the app. It has to be 30 seconds. Even if it doesn't matter if it has 1 billion users or it has 10 users. If it takes you 30 minutes, you're never going to use the app. As simple as that. So that's the first answer to your first question, that these three things I look for becoming a PM, right? The second thing, can anybody be a product manager? Absolutely. Anybody from any background, because it is essentially problem solving, right? Now, there can be nuances that you're working for a particular domained product. Like if I'm a product manager for the Serum Institute of India, devising the COVID vaccine, obviously it will be better that if I'm from a biology background and understand how chemicals work or molecules work, right? But fundamentally, you are a problem solver. How do you deliver it, right? So in majority of the places, it really doesn't matter which background you come from. Even Google, Microsoft, I have a lot of friends who are from arts backgrounds, accounting backgrounds, who've become PMs, right? And the third question, in the life cycle of PM, so typically there is an ideal life cycle and there is a real life cycle. So I'll talk about both, right? The ideal life cycle is that I should spend as much time with my consumer every week. Like every week, I should spend at least 3 to 4 hours speaking to my consumer. For me, it's kids in the age of 10 to 18 as of now. So I want to talk to them, what makes them tick, what makes them, what is their value, what they like, what they don't like, how do they engage better, so that I understand their fundamental pillars of like curiosity, right? That is typically that I want to spend 3-4 hours. But in general, for a PM, at least at my level, what I keep doing is initially I go into a month, plan out that what are the features which we figured out from user research and want to implement this month. Simultaneously, I will also look at what are my core metrics as my current product. What is it? How is it doing? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it working well? Is it not working well? Then I will spend a certain amount of time with customer support, right? Is the actual value that I see in my eyes getting delivered to the user the same way? So I'll spend some amount of time with customer support. And then typically the fourth and the most critical part is where I spend some amount of time with the business, because the business has to work and it has to self-sustain itself. So how do you build a concurrent business strategy so that the business is also growing, simultaneously the value prop is also growing? More often than not, you see in startups, these two disalign. Either you're growing users, either you're growing revenue. But I guess fundamentally as a PM, these two are tied very seamlessly. Like if I give you too much value, you're bound to pay for it, right? If I give you good food, you'll absolutely pay for it. So I think that's the whole purview of the entire month. Yeah.
That is a good, well-rounded picture, Shravan. I can see my friend Pramod Datta Ramesh has also joined the audience. I'm very happy to see him in the crowd. And I hope he has got a couple of questions for you.
Yep.
Dear all, please have your questions ready, because I think another 2-3 minutes, we would like to start the Q&A session. This is your club. And I'm sure a lot of curiosities in your mind around what Shravan has said. There might be other questions that you had from, probably the last couple of weeks, months, around product management, around empathy, around the larger art of doing this. Whatever this is, right? We all see this differently. So please feel free to start sharing your questions here. I'm going to start moderating them in a minute or two.
Yeah.
And Shravan, while the audience starts preparing the questions for you, everyone like in the product management circle in India is very well aware of you and your style of teaching. About product management. There are almost 50,000 people who follow you on LinkedIn, and then another thousands of them on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you have a daily dose of, teaching which comes out to people.
Yeah.
and a certain style that you have.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us why you started doing this and why this particular style?
Yeah. So I think one of the major concerns about product management that has been, unfortunately, that's how it's a logical concern which goes back to education in general. Education, fundamentally, I've always believed should be a lever to drive curiosity, right? Now, what really happened in India as product management came into picture, right? People started talking about the Western terms that they have built for products, which I would not say are wrong, because in the West, people had products since 1990s. They could compare it to something. In India, we didn't have any of that. Now, what happened? People just picked up those terms and tried to apply them here. And it didn't work. It clearly didn't. It's two different markets, two different ways of doing things. But what would in general work is the approach that can you make it as simple as possible and as engaging as possible in order for the user to understand what is better than humor, right? So devs always had the developer community, which has been largely popular since the 1990s, since the open source movement, the no code movement. It started off when Linux came up with Linux and everything happened. People started democratizing code. They always used sarcasm as to tell things which you shouldn't do, right? Like you should not release on a Friday. But if you release on a Friday, this will happen. Something as a caution that this is not the appropriate step that you should take. So I thought, if people really, and this, when internet became cheaper in India and products started coming up, I thought, what's the best way to do this? If I speak about the same things like Agile, Scrum, etc., ABCD, it's going to be the same thing and it's not going to be applicable here anyway, right? So why don't I make it very simple and very funny? And if it's funny, people will retain. Now, humor was the first element, which was just to drive retention. But if people come again and again on a blog, because of some reason, there is a certain percentage of people who start to realize that there is a certain insight behind that humor. Maybe earlier it was 5%, but eventually because of the humor, that 5% became 40%. And that started reflecting into the results that people started getting product management jobs. They started understanding things. And then they realized they could relate that it's not like you have to be from an elite college, like a Harvard, Stanford. It's like a normal guy with common sense and empathy for problem solving can be a PM. And Shravan looks like that normal guy. So I can also, so it was more like from an inspiration point of view that if he can do it, anybody can. Anybody can. And that is the movement that I've tried to put across very relentlessly in India. And whatever little amount of success that I've had, whatever little amount of success, I'm duly grateful because the other ripple effect that has happened because of that, I've built truly amazing relationships with people. I've stayed in the hearts of people. And one of the things that I keep saying in most of my sessions, I want to live 1,000 years. And the best way to live 1,000 years is by staying in the hearts of people. So probably that, yeah.
For folks who have been listening in, Shravan shares almost daily fantastic points of view on product management, in the form of humor, jokes. A lot of those jokes are around this software tool called Jira, Jira. Yeah. And there is a lot of fun being made of the fact that you might have gone down to an engineering college, learned all your quadratic equation and trigonometry and advanced calculus and your MBA concepts. And at the end of the day, what you really need is an Excel sheet with the ability to do a VLOOKUP. So please start following him up because you're going to have a lot of fun out there. Alessandro, I want to invite you over here to ask your question. Do you want to unmute and join us?
Yeah, thank you. So my question is, when you spend time with your potential customers, the 3 or 4 hours per week, what do you usually use? Like the traditional tools like focus groups, questionnaires, or neurotracking tools, for example, fMRI, EEG, or eye tracking? Because most of the companies, they say that, for example, when we work on the subconscious level, it's much better than the conscious level, so the questions, because we know really what like the potential customers like or dislike. Yeah. But not all the companies are using the, let's say, subconscious level.
Got it. So for us, Alessandro, one of the key things is that people fail to realize that once COVID has come, they think that Zoom can be an effective platform for education. Everybody thinks like that, right? But that's actually not the case with children. they don't necessarily know how to, if like a screen share might be a very simple option for you, right? And you can share your screen, but a kid might not be able to do that. So what we essentially do is we pick up a random sample size from our beta audience, that the audience that uses our products whenever we want to launch a product. And then we have a very strong UX team who just does a mood boarding exercise, that they put across some sort of a product in front of them and tells them play with it and tries to organize their emotions. Where are they feeling happy? What is something that they're clearly understanding? And come up with some sort of basic abstract keynote or bite-sized insights that this is something that a student wanted, that he was very comfortable in an iPad in comparison to a mobile phone, because an iPad is handy to him because it's something that his parents have bought, but a phone is his parents' phone, right? So so for us, the focused group exercise is very prevalent, because for us, it is really important, because our cohort is not the same as you and me, as someone who is 25-year-old or using Instagram, using Facebook. It's actually a kid of 12 years age or 13 years age, right? So for us, every month, what we do a very concurrent, large-scale focused group exercise across the country. We have around a 100-member team of UX designers who effectively sit with these kids. They do mood boarding exercises with them. And I also join in some of the sessions because of the product that I'm leading, and try to understand what they understand. I never try to poke them that this is something that you should do on a conscious level, that this is something that we just want them to use the product and try to understand through heat maps, just trying to understand that how are they using it, or primarily through apps, just to understand that what is their user journey, from which page they went to which page, how did they use the app, how did they use the platform, which resources they used, and try to build them in a construct of a single user journey, like logging into the app, then using what leverage they had towards the first activity they did, and finally, how did they leave the app, and then try to build some sort of conscious circles around it, like building a complete user journey and try to identify gaps there. We also supplement that with data using funnels or growth loops, for that matter. Give me a second, just a second. I'm sorry, extremely sorry. Yeah. So we also complement that with data using user funnels, and then the focused group anecdotal evidence. If it matches with the qualitative data evidence, then we effectively make a feature change, what we want to do. Tools can be anything. We generally don't rely on, we typically for wireframing, we use Miro. We just create wireframes and let them through it, right? Or specifically we use for internal mood boarding exercise, we have specific internal company tools which we have built, which we effectively use to drive outcomes. But the core objective here is, does our anecdotal evidence support our quantitative data backed evidence? If these two evidences align together, then we actually start an experiment and run that experiment on scale. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
Alessandro, does it answer your question?
Yes. Obviously, probably you're not going to use like an fMRI, because it's more difficult for a child or a young adult to stay for like hours inside of the fMRI. But yeah, I got what kind of tools and what is the procedure to find the solution. Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Alessandro, you're from, can you help us remember where were you from? I'm kind of hazy on our memory here.
I come from Italy, but I live in Brighton and the United Kingdom.
In UK right now, fantastic. All right. I want to next invite in our guest, Adela Strakova. You had a question, Adela. Can you please unmute and join us here?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Rakesh. Hi, Shravan. Thank you all for the opportunity to ask a question directly. So, because this is a behavioral science club, I was just wondering, because I'm just kind of self-taught PM and exploring behavioral science, all the mental models. So I was just wondering whether you are using any behavioral science knowledge in your product management, and if yes, at what point? Of whether it's during the experimentation or whether it's during the user experience interviews and so on, and whether you have any framework around that is connected to behavioral science. Thanks.
I think Adela, that's a very good question. I think behavioral science is more like a layer. It's not necessarily like an input or some sort of an experiment that you do in between. It actually starts from the idea generation to actually design creation, and it's part of everywhere where we try to split things into cohorts. The reason for that is, if you look at India as a country, because we are primarily focused on India, right? It's a multilingual country. It has a lot of intense cohorts. Like sometimes we realize that even in the same state, right, there are 10 different types of cohorts, right? So at a particular time in Baiju, we are currently doing like 30 plus experiments right now, which are running on our data platform. 30 plus experiments, right? So in order to just understand from a mental model perspective, there's only one mental model that we fundamentally use. That mental model is that value brings repeat usage. It's as simple as that. That if you design value and the customer is actually giving you a good NPS score, he's bound to come back. He's bound to come back. Now, how do you effectively define that value for a cohort? What I mean by a cohort is, let's assume that I have 4 million users on my platform. I might divide them into 400 cohorts, right? Based on certain parameters. What's their age? Which language do they use? Then which phones do they use? What's the internet penetration over there? There can be multiple n number of variables, right? And if you set the right cohort and see that the rating, that the typical RFM curve that we have, recency, frequency, and monetization curve, it is moving towards the champion scenario, right? We try to do that, replicate that experiment across the entire cohort. First, we do it for maybe 2,000 users, 3,000 users, 4,000 users, and then try to scale the experiment on 10%, 20%, 30%, and take it to 100%. And then effectively, if the curve either grows or flattens at a certain point, which is above our baseline, we feel that the experiment is done well. And we take, because there is only one mental model that works at a personality standpoint, that if a product is effectively giving you, so I'll just quickly move to one small aspect which you will really enjoy. So how do you define a product in my sense? A product is basically two layers. One is a product layer, second is a service layer. The service layer can be the same. Like me talking to you is just content, right? But how do I position it? That's the product layer. Like, why do I like Duolingo as a product? Because the end outcome is learning a language, but the way that you play it, it seems like a game, right? So you're actually using it like a toy. So the product is actually a toy. So what, people come back on our app because they want to have fun while education, but the end outcome is actually learning the concept. So we always try to differentiate these two layers, which kind of doesn't happen across in majority of the products. And if these two layers are very well differentiated, then people will come back not only for the service, because service is just the value that they want, right? They'll come for the experience. Like, I mean, the same reason you use Gmail more than Outlook, because Gmail has Smart Compose. Like if I'm writing hi, and it will automatically tell you hi Adela, and that is an experience that you will be like, oh wow, what happened? They just figured out that who I'm writing the email to, and that small Q, that small DX is going to make a very small behavioral change. People don't realize it, but majority of the products are built DX, 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 and then it's an integration. Then it takes you to X, and that X is where the differentiator, the moat is created. It's not every time you need to have a different idea. It's how you position the idea. That's really, I don't believe in the construct that you need to have a different idea in order to be successful. You just need to position the idea which ticks to the consumer from a behavioral science perspective. So that is something that we intend to do. But as a framework, there are models like BJ Fogg's model that you typically, but I am not a fan of frameworks, to be very honest. I'm generally not. I'm more closer to the user from an empathy standpoint. I really want to be accessible to the user to understand what he likes, what he doesn't like. And the only thing that I really like is how do you make a more wholesome experiment, and that happens with large ingestion of knowledge. That can only happen via that. More conversations lead to more better refined experiments. That's it.
Thanks a lot.
I hope that was helpful to you. Please keep on joining the future sessions too. We talked about mental models, and everyone here knows how much Christine Kaur loves them. Christine, want to join us for your question? I think a part of it was answered, but it will still be helpful if you can unmute and join us here.
Sure. Thank you, Prakash, for that. Thank you, Shravan, for all of those insights. I loved your quotes that I actually captured during this entire talk. So I think, like Prakash mentioned, you actually spoke about the mental model, but if there is any particular mental model that you use and my follow-up question is if there is any hypothesis that has failed or that was invalidated and the lesson that you actually took away. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think again, I'm sorry, I just forgot your name. Can you just repeat your name again?
Yeah, that's Krishleen.
Yeah, Christine. Hi. So first of all, again, from a mental model perspective, the only model that I've fundamentally understood as a user is that you don't necessarily want to any model is just to curate information, And specifically, in order to curate information, what you have to do is you have to deep dive towards the first principle. If you get to the first principle very clearly, then you don't need a model, because a mental model is just an addition of first principles. That's how it is. But from my side, the second question is very relevant, that an hypothesis that has duly failed. So I'll give you a very interesting example. In my second company, which is currently a unicorn in India, it recently became a unicorn. It's an Uber for trucks. What we used to realize as a hypothesis, which is very apparent to us, and that is when I realized that cohorts behave very, very differently than how we think about it. So what we used to think is that if we give a higher price to a driver, which is typically in Uber, if the ride revenue per user is higher, then it should lead to higher retention. That I am making more, maybe 25% more bucks than a typical Uber ride, right? So that is something that we thought of. And we built the entire pricing engine based on this hypothesis that at every journey, you will give some sort of an upfront payment and will pay 20% more. And that too also upfront. Typically in logistics industry, you pay after the ride is done. You don't, especially in India, in the transportation sector. And what we realized is that our app adoption was not even 15%. And we were still calling the user that, why are you not booking my app? So what I did, I went to Bombay. Bombay is a city in India. I'm sure most of you people would know. And there's a nearby area called Bhiwandi. And I actually sat with the truck driver and took a trip from Bhiwandi to Calcutta via truck. And I asked him this very same question, that dude, we're paying you more money. We're paying you more money. We're giving you upfront payments. Why are you still not booking, right? And then I realized at that point of time, he told me that, sir, I would definitely want to book from your app, but the fundamental problem for me is that when I purchase a truck, when I am the driver of the truck, I have to pay consistent EMIs. So for me, it is not really important the revenue per ride, but my truck should consistently run. So if you send me to a location where I don't get a revert ride from B to A, I would never take that, because I will have to come back offloaded, and it's going to cost me way more than the amount of money that you're giving me. So what we did, we changed this very same philosophy. We changed the hypothesis and we brought the high density lanes up on the app. And within 3 months, our app adoption was 85%. And this, now think of it from our scenario. From my scenario, if I'm an Uber driver in America, Uber is more like my side income gig. And I would make like 25% more on every ride. Why not? I'll do it. But for a truck driver who's a completely different cohort, I spend time with him. He doesn't really care if you pay him more or less. He just wants his truck to keep running. And that's where the hypothesis changed, completely changed. And that is where we reached to that first principle. That's why the one learning that I keep telling PMs is whenever you move into a product role, the first 90 days, don't learn anything. Don't learn any of the tools, etc., design patterns. Just spend time with your consumer, so that after 90 days, if I ask you, what is the persona of your consumer? You should have that crystal clear in your head that I am building for him. I am building for Shravan, this type of persona. He's a 25-year-old guy who makes this much amount of money, has this much salary, is coming from this particular background. And if you have identified your user persona every 90 days, then I don't think that you would need any particular specific model, because you will be already aligned in your head that this is the persona I'm building for, whether it will work or not. Then experiments become very structured for you. Typically, people say that most of the experiments fail and 2 or 3 experiments out of 100 work. But that's really not the case. It's just how closer you're sitting to the user. Yeah.
Krishleen,
Thank you for that.
All right, I can see your comment out this. It's a light bulb moment. Thank you, Shravan. It's easy to talk about successes. Failures are a little more difficult to talk about, and we do learn a lot from them. Pramod, do you want to join us in? Unmute and ask your question yourself.
Sure, Prakash. Thank you so much for having me. Hey, Shravan, big fan, heard a lot, and I really liked your developer, quotes that you put out. Right, I totally resonate with that. So I have one primary question. I'm a practicing PM too. I have one primary question. Typically, when we start to build a product, usually there's a corporate vision, and you have something your bosses and your excos want to build, and then you kind of find you do your market segmentation, and you want to build it for some subset of users. You usually, more often than not, what I've seen is we start building together, everybody thinks they're on the same page, and then customers start to drive more and more requirements, which start taking tangents. And your corporate vision is not in line. You usually get derailed there. So my question is more in the lines of, how do you kind of bridge that gap between where your corporation thinks you want to take your product line, and then your customers are totally different and asking for different things? So how do you kind of bridge that gap?
Got it. So very interesting question. So actually, the question that you've asked, if I take it very to a first principle basis, it's practically a question of hiring. It's not a question of product management. It's actually a question of hiring. So I'll tell you what, there are two fundamental things that whenever you join a company and see that the vision is driven towards that or not. The first thing is that anybody in the company should be duly passionate about the problem. Duly passionate about the problem. What I mean by passion is, passion typically is aligned to the value to the consumer, right? Now, if everybody is duly passionate about the problem and has very high talent density and has very high candor, any criticism that happens among teams in order to build certain things, because sales is telling, build this feature, this will give us 1 million revenue, but you as product manager say, I can't build this is not aligned with the philosophy of the product. It is a fundamental problem in the entire hiring structure. If you hire the right people, they're already aligned, because everybody is working towards one thing, which is the one best thing that is going to add value in the long-term basis. And that is something that people are like. And when I always speak about this, if you have very high talent density and radical candor, any criticism always leads to constructive criticism, and constructive criticism is always good. The point is, when you start thinking of yourself first, more often than not, what happens in sales is that I have a $5 million target. I want to hit it. And this one feature is going to give me $1 million revenue. So they have to build it. So I am thinking of myself first, then the user. And that is where disalignment happens. That is why I give a very interesting example of this interesting company called Intercom. Everybody thought of Intercom as a chat tool. It's not a chat tool. It's a horizontal service layer, right? And the kind of products, what they do, they follow this philosophy called JTBC, jobs to be done, right? So what they typically do is they typically go with the consumers and try to understand that one problem that sales kicks out, and they figure out from a consumer psychology perspective also that what is that one problem, what is that one job that the user would need to do from our chat app. What is that one job that they need? Is it sharing some message with someone, or probably sending automated emailer? So they figure out on the basis of a job, and everybody aligns there together that this is the one job that I solve, which adds enormous value to the user. So if you see core, I consistently keep speaking this in majority of the places. If engineering is not your core strength, then you need to relook the fact that you're working for a product company or not. You really need to relook that fact. Because the fundamental construct here is engineering will only build, they will invest their bandwidth there only where there is immense value. Because if I am investing time and money of my time, which is X amount, I would definitely want a 10x return on anything. When you invest 1 rupee somewhere, you want 10 rupees return, right? That's the simple logic. The same logic has to be applied there. But more often than not, it doesn't happen in high growth companies because of ancillary reasons, investor reasons, and stuff like that. That's why I'm a huge fan of bootstrap startups. Like Zoho is a very classic example of it. And they've done enormously well over there. So if you hire the right people, the problem that you're asking will never happen.
For sure. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Joe, you had a question. You want to join us in? Thanks, Pramod. Joe, can you hear us? Or have you just about left the chat? Okay. I'm going to ask the question on behalf of Joe. I think it's a little bit a broad question. It's very specific to the company you work in right now. So if that's a question you'd rather not take, that's also pretty much cool. But you can also make it a very generic, high-level question, minus the context of the specific company where you're right now. So what are the key metrics? What are the key metrics you capture as a PM when you work? Number one. Would your primary metric be knowledge retention or would it be adoption?
Got it.
So this becomes the context of, let's say, an edtech company, any edtech company, right? Knowledge retention or adoption.
Understood.
A third question from there can be, would adoption be the right metric for online education? Because there is a certain dilemma. And you spoke about Zoom some time back. And the dilemma is, do you want your kids to be glued to their tablets? And this is like a larger, let's make a larger, broad question for the entire online edtech pandemic learning, this larger question, right? So three parters actually. The metrics, what is important, and how do you resolve ethical dilemmas, if any?
Very interesting question. I hope that Joe was in the call and I would have answered this, but then again, I would still go ahead and answer this question. I think the fundamental thing that people fail to realize is what is engagement or retention. Now, retention doesn't necessarily mean you doing any activity on the app, right? What you're talking about here is relevant retention. What is relevant retention? Relevant retention basically means I, as a product manager, see something that, like in Flipkart or Amazon, for everybody's perspective, Amazon is something that everybody knows. The right metric for me to look at is that people coming there and adding to cart. Right? If somebody is spending 30 minutes on Amazon and not doing anything, just scrolling, doesn't add any value to me, nor it shows that you are the right discovery platform, because he couldn't find anything and added nothing to his cart, right? So the point is the same with EdTech. For me, I am not really worried about students coming in, watching the entire video and spending 3 hours on the app. I'm just concerned about this one thing, that are they, like for me, it might be just, are they attending their live classes correctly? It can be different for different people, right? Now, if you just take care of that one metric, that one core metric which you have defined, I always keep speaking about this. People think that retention means daily active users, monthly active users. It means nothing. If people come on your app and sign up on your app and do nothing, your daily active users might be 50% of whatever your user base is, but they're not adding any value to your platform, right? So from an ethical dilemma standpoint, what we effectively keep doing, so I'll ask the first question from a retention standpoint. For me, it's very relevant. Is it relevant retention? Is it that one metric which effectively ties to the NPS of the product, which can be like watching the entire live class? That might be one metric. I don't really care whether he comes on the app back again or not. I don't really care. Might really be like that. The third thing is, from an ethical dilemma standpoint, we only nudge the user which we feel is going to add value to his education. We don't nudge him to come into the app again and again. Like, I'll give you one simple example. If you go to Duolingo, they ask you a very interesting thing. Can I quickly share my screen and I'll give you a very interesting example of it? If you can give me the access, thank you very much. So I'll just quickly go to Duolingo and you will just find the answer to the question that you just asked. I get started. I click on Spanish. I don't care, something, etc. Whatever it's culture. See, they ask you that, is it casual? Are you serious? And we will notify you when you want. This is where they're taking care of the ethical dilemma part, that we will only nudge you how much you want. That is exactly what we also do. We want to drive relevant retention because that makes sense to us. Other than that, somebody coming on my app and doing nothing on the app, I would not call him a retained user. So that is where most companies, it's kind of a innovator. That's something that's innovator's dilemma, or a policy that people, to showcase to investors that we have people spending 180 minutes on the app, but it actually doesn't mean anything. Yeah. So that's the answer to your question.
Shravan, thank you so much. Problem solver at scale. followers of first principles, basic truths to guide yourself, accessible, humble, full of compassion for your user.
Yeah.
And passion, which is enjoying the process, because there's a certain grind to being a product manager. So the ability to enjoy that process, the art of prioritization, and learning to operate with constraints to guide yourself. Now, this is what we have, from you today. And before we go, I do want to invite in Shrutin. I think you have one more question.
Yeah.
Shrutin, do you want to join us?
Yeah, hi Shravan. Exceptional session. Yeah, it was more of a comment actually. In the initial bits where you mentioned Uber as an example. It's my belief that every successful business kind of better aligns itself with the customer. So just to give you an example, back between 2006 and 2010, I was part of the investment team at Sidbi Venture Capital. We had funded what was back then, I think, the second largest, ride service that was available in India, Cars on Rent, if you've heard of it. Right. Technically, it was number one because Meru, which was number one, was a debt-funded company. So they were burning money like crazy. They were like hugely loss-making. Ours was equity funded, and so we were like almost there. But in retrospect, when I look at it, it was more like Cars and Rent was already on the model of roping in people who owned a car and were willing to kind of come into this network. So they already started that. But I guess it was just more about maybe greed or not wanting to let go of a business model that they were comfortable with, which Uber did just a year or two later in terms of, and then completely revolutionized that space. I think in 2019, a couple of months before lockdown, I noticed this, that so I use Uber. I used to use Uber quite a bit. This particular university that I'm visiting faculty at, it's a long way from here, so frequent rides used to be there. Uber had, within a span of a few weeks or months, I think, gone from like a 15% share of the revenue to in like 2 or 3 quick successions to about 28%.
Got it.
It was really hurting the drivers and the vehicle owners. So at that time I felt maybe this is time for like a new model to kind of appear, because every time I'd get into a ride, the driver would ask me like, how much did you get the ride for, which is very, very kind of awkward. But they would do this, and I think they were just trying to kind of just double check whether they were not getting conned by the company. And I was just wondering, maybe it's kind of a signal towards maybe a more efficient model, better aligned with users again. So I think thank you for the wonderful examples of the insights and all of that.
It's a pleasure. It's Shravan, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Prakash, I had one question. Can I go?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. So Shravan, thank you so much for this insightful discussion. And I am a UX researcher in e-commerce. So I constantly work with product managers. So my question is that if you are working in an environment which is called disruptive, technology, where you're constantly making changes and the value proposition of the product constantly change, and it changes overnight, sometimes. So how do you prioritize your product goals then? And, the performance indicators, roadmaps. So what exactly do you do in such situations?
I think one of the things that you have to very functionally think of is that, are you solving the right problem then? Then the question is not about changing product goals.
Yeah.
It's the question about, are you even looking at the right problem? Because if overnight your product is changing and it's completely changing its value proposition, then the earlier problem was not really the correct problem that you were looking at. Right?
I understand. Not exactly the entire product, but yes, a lot of things changes.
Changes are something that definitely, if you better your value proposition, what do you call an MVP, right? There's a common
Minimum
jargon.
value proposition.
Yes, the common jargon that people use is MVP, minimum viable product.
Viable product.
I've always believed that before you build your MVP, right, there is a virality coefficient that automatically happens. Like, let me give you a very simple example. If you're in a college, right, and you want to, and this is one problem that most people feel in university and college, they want notes for exams to come, right? And you have a repository of notes. Assume you have last 10 years of notes, which are there with you. So very simple way, if you have to test the fact that does a note-taking app make sense or not? Does a check work or not? Make a WhatsApp group, send it across in the group, and just keep a common link, bit.ly link there, and see how many shares are happening. If it organically grows, then you already have an MVP in place. So your if your virality coefficient is already high, then your MVP is actually that you are solving the right problem. This is exactly what I keep telling PMs. Your job is execution comes far later in your journey, far later. The best PMs are the ones who understand the right problem. If you are investing enough time on why, then you have made it. Like most of the times when I take interviews, I tell PMs like, dude, just chill. Think of it like I'm talking to a friend and two smart people just talking about a problem. If he's able to convey the problem to me well, I hire him. Because you are not Elon Musk that you will come in 60 minutes, do a tweet and start, I'm starting a boring company from tomorrow because I cannot handle traffic. So that is not how it happens. So most PMs, great PMs, like if you follow Andrew Chen and some of the people, Anshumani Rudra, I would definitely want you to invite him to this club. He's an amazing PM. He works in Google. So most of the great PMs, they are very bent on the fact, and we will have conversations with them. Out of the 60 minutes, they'll spend 50 minutes only on the problem. That are we understanding it well? If you have understood it well, then any of the incremental changes, you'll always feel that your product goals are already aligned. They're aligned to the right way. So if this is happening, then you should question and go back to your PM and ask him, what is the one core exact problem? What is the intrinsic motivation that you want to solve this problem for? If he's not able to answer that in simple words, I'm sorry, he's not doing a good job.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking in questions after questions, Shravan. Pallavi also, thank you so much for bringing in questions. I think Kathleen has got one more question. Is it, Kathleen? Are you saying bye? Are you saying a bye? All right, Kathleen. So this is where we're gonna end the session for today. Before we all go, Shravan did drop one interesting piece of suggestion. Say, you have behavioral science, you got B equal to MAP and a couple of other frameworks and all. But a better approach as a product manager might just be to keep talking to one user or two users every day for almost 90 days.
We do that. We do that, Prakash, we do that.
Oh, fantastic.
Longitudinal studies. We do longitudinal studies and we do diary studies also, where we talk to one participant.
No. Thank you so much, Pallavi. And for those of us who are aspiring PMs who are curious about how this behavioral science ties to the larger discipline of product management, people are curious about this flow, ever tried. I hope this session was useful. Shravan, thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, any last suggestion to us? By the way, folks, I've shared Shravan's YouTube channel out there. I'm going to share them again in the group later. He runs a fantastic program on his YouTube called the Swag Wala PM. The PM with the swag. That's what it means. Swag Wala PM. Before we go, Shravan, any last suggestions?
I think stay curious. I think one of the ways that I keep telling myself to individuals is the day I stop being curious, I'll die. That's the day I die. So I think stay curious, keep having conversations, because conversations are the best way to learn. There is no better way. No podcast, no book is going to teach you more than conversations with people. Just be upfront about it. And the second thing is, please start writing. Writing is something that really, really builds a very profound sense of articulation in yourself. And there is one last book that I would definitely recommend all of you to read. This is this book called Leaders Start With Why by Simon Sinek. It's an amazing book, and it spends phenomenal amount of energy and scope on this particular fact that why is why important. Why is why important? So that is something that you should do. And another book that is very close to my heart is the Bhagavad Gita. If you want to read that, that's something it's a phenomenal book. It will tell you more about first principles in life in general, that how do you define virtue? Where does it come from? Like, is morality subjective or not? Those are some of the topics that we can definitely discuss some other time if we have the topic. But that's something that I leave you with. Stay curious, keep having conversations, and please reach out to me on LinkedIn anytime. I would love to have a chat with any of you folks. It was lovely being here. Thanks a lot for the invite. Yeah.
Thank you, Shravan. Everyone, take care, stay safe. Hopefully the pandemic is almost done. Yeah. Last 3.5 months remaining before the New Year's to come. Yeah. Stay safe meanwhile. Have fun. Come for the next session. It's with Chris Arnick. We're going to learn about semiotics, the beautiful art of semiotics, and how does it connect to behavioral science. Now, that's going to be a session that will blow your mind, just like this one did. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye. Take care.